here joining us today.
Hi.
Good morning, Karen. How are you?
Good morning, Tracy. How are you?
I have just been screaming my head off at the American Library Association's Midwinter Youth Media Awards. What a wonderful morning. I am so grateful to all of you that have joined us for this chat about We Are Still Here and the making of the book. But I know that everyone's still celebrating all those wonderful books that got awarded this morning and looking forward to books that are to come. So again, we thank you for taking time out of your schedule to visit with us, and we look forward to your questions.
Yeah, it's exciting to be here, and I'm so glad that we get to talk about this book in particular, just because I know we both love it so much, and we can't wait to get it into everybody's hands. And your bookshelf looks so beautiful behind you. You're so organized. Everyone just gets to look at my dresser. So there you go.
Well, I feel like it helps if when I'm doing, appearances that people have something other than just, it's a beautiful bright yellow wall, but I was like, so I rearranged my office so they weren't just looking at the closet door.
Oh, you're smart. That's excellent. So let's get started talking about what you and I always want to talk about with this book, and then we can take questions as they come. And I'm hoping that someone's going to filter those to us in the chat, or we can see some comments too. But I know some will come our way via the person behind the scenes, which is great. So why don't you start us off and talk a little bit about the origin of the book? Like, how did this book come to be?
Okay. Well, my background is in federal Indian law and policy. So as an undergrad, I was a Native American Studies major, and one of my classes my last year was Native American law. And that really prompted me to go beyond a first generation college graduate. And that prompted me to go beyond just a bachelor's degree and to study in my master's and then later get a law degree. So what I realized in those studies is like, none of this is taught in our schools. Like, we have no clue about any of this stuff. I knew things about my tribe, and that's certainly what you get in We Are Grateful, OTSALIHELIGA. But I thought, the majority of us growing up have no idea that there's this larger set of policies in place, that tribes are working together to advocate for things. And so not quite, almost 2 years ago, you and I were at Kindling Words East, which is a kidlit retreat for authors and illustrators and editors. And we had a meeting, and you said, I really want to do another book with you. What would you like to write about? And I said, this. We need to have a book that, young people get introduced to these things early on, because it's not in their curriculum. It probably won't be in their curriculum anytime soon, or at least on a nationwide basis like it should be. Everyone should know this information that lives here. And so if we can start with providing something to young people, and you were on board from the beginning, and I am forever grateful for that, because what I've just said previously is, this is law and policy, right? Like, it's not easy. It's not often entertaining, but it's necessary. So I am grateful to you that you said, great, let's do it. And then it
really became trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we take this enormous, not only the enormous body of information, right? Like in terms of quantity, but then also how do you boil that down in a way where kids can easily access it, right?
Yeah. And that's where the structure from We Are Grateful, OTSALIHELIGA helped, because I did a longer opening piece to kind of explain why we don't start, at the arrival of Europeans on the shores. And we really look at kind of the place where we exit the curriculum. And that is after the reservation period, is, formally kind of closed in terms of treaty making stops in 1871. And so then everybody thinks, oh, okay, well, Indians are just doing their own thing, and that we disappear, by 1900s from curriculum. So it's like, well, nobody disappeared. We're still here, and there's all these things that are happening. all the time. So,
And
have agency, and that needs to be communicated. So I was just going to say that we are grateful has, kind of an opening line and then subparts of the stanza. And that really helped me to focus on keeping the concepts simple, and explaining not just time periods really, but kind of movements around certain laws or policies. Yes. So what you're seeing now on the screen is self-determination. And that is a policy that became a law and enacted in the 1970s and has grown ever since. And so this is a picture actually that Frenae Lessig, the illustrator, put together, featured in the forest in New Mexico, where the Mescalero Apache are managing their own forests and have taken that responsibility, back from the federal government. So there's all kinds of things that come from self-determination. It's not just a matter of saying, we want to be in control of this, that, or the other. It's actually providing services to the community in a culturally appropriate way and in a way that best makes sense for individual Native nations to do that. And one of those things for the Mescalero Apache is managing the forests around them, in a way that is culturally appropriate and necessary for their continued, access to medicines, to just caretaking of the land, providing a place for animal relatives to be, safely, et cetera.
So one of the reasons first of all, the big thing I think is that you say that natives sort of disappear from the curriculum, but I think you can even make it broader than that, right? That after treaty making ends, Native American interests, ideas, concerns, needs kind of exit the US government's concern, right? So the US government kind of says, we're done making treaties with tribes, we're done making agreements with Native nations, and so good luck. And everything we've done to you up till this point is now your problem, right, in some ways. And all those laws and policies that are already in place, too bad for you, you have to live with those, right? And so it's really...
On some level, I mean, they continue making laws, but many of them are more punitive.
Well, of course,
right. Really have to come together in a more pan-Indian way, a pan-tribal way to address things. And you start to see that not just individual groups, but multitudes of Native nations coming together to advocate for laws and policies where that had been done more individually, because of signing their individual treaties, and right. Now the law gets applied more broadly. But to your point, we also disappear out of popular culture, except as written into Western movies or, the cowboys and Indians type of stereotype, or same thing with literature, right? It's a very stereotypical, muted presence where characters are not fleshed out. Again, the lack of agency. And so one of the things with this book is saying, no, that is absolutely not true. Native nations and their citizens have shown agency continuously. And at times it's been more difficult than others, but that absolutely is the case. And again, everyone should know that, in your family, in your school, in your community. I want better citizens in general, that when people grow up, they're not ignorant to these things, because they will, be community members, they will be business leaders, they will be scientists, they will be teachers, they will be elected officials, and they need to not cause additional harm by not knowing things. That is what we have found very much, this past year with the pandemic, is how much harm is caused by us not knowing about each other, about not taking those considerations into place. And just, it's like everything that we, many of us have known and experienced has bubbled up to the surface.
Yeah. And as you say, though, too, that in the way popular culture portrays natives in particular, but any group, has been largely written by white people. right? So those movies, those scripts, those books, all those things that portray the Native folks as you are describing are written by people who know nothing about that history, who choose to learn nothing about it. And so that really impacts what the message is that gets out to the general populace around who tells the story, right? And I think that was the other thing you and I talked about, because you are writing about general stuff in this book, not just about your own tribe. And really the experts you talked to make sure you were getting things right, and the different tribal members you reached out to show them illustrations that you were intending to be specific to their tribe or their area of the country. And can you talk a little bit about how you use other experts when you write your books? Because I think a lot of people assume if you are a Native author or a Native creator, you can write about anything quote unquote Native, right? But is that true?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I have that same approach for fiction and nonfiction. So I don't want someone to think like, just because, this book, again, I have a law policy background, and obviously I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, like somehow I don't consult with other people. That's absolutely not the case. And so many people will look at the drafts that I've written, and they look at the art that's created. I put that into my book contracts, because once it's out in the world, again, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you can't take it back. And so we need to do the work on the front end. And I, say often that bookmaking is a team sport. And there are many, many people that I depend on to help me craft the words. But also, I feel like it's my responsibility to help the illustrator, whoever that is, whether they're from the tribe being represented or not, to have as much information as they need to create the art, and to have that accurate. And the same goes within the broader book team, you as the editor, the art director, sales, marketing. I mean, we all want this book out in the world, but we don't want to cause any harm in doing so, right? We want to have a good product that people can take in and say, okay, I know that, and again, it's not that we're putting out perfection, right? There's always can be errors, but it is important that what I find is when I read books by non-Native people that are written about First Nations, their citizens, there is a removed, almost clinical kind of type of thing. And, I want to say, have you talked to folks from the tribe? Have you talked to other folks? Because if you do, you would have a very different way of writing this. And so it just leaves a lot to be desired. And again, for young readers, many of whom are not going to have any of this reinforced in their classroom, maybe even in their families, in their community, I feel like it's even a greater responsibility. And so I take it very seriously. And I'm grateful that you and Frenae and everyone else on the bookmaking team did also.
Yeah, I think the other thing is to think about that you and I talked a lot about who this book is for, and that we were clear from the very beginning that We Are Grateful OTSALIHELIGA was for younger kids than this book was going to be for. But we also wanted this book to be a kind of companion, right? That you could read We Are Grateful OTSALIHELIGA, learn a little bit specifically about the Cherokee Nation, and then come over to this book as a little bit of an older reader and really look at what's the more broader picture here in terms of what goes on with Native folks in the country, right? And I think one of the things that we struggled with a lot, right, was how to make sure that we weren't writing this in a way that doesn't invite kids to really dive in and go find out other information, but that we also were writing it in a way that really where they could understand it, where they could really get what they needed to get out of the text and not be left behind by the words. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that was one of the struggles you and I had.
Yeah, definitely. Because we know that the majority of children, may have traditional stories that are shared, in books that are designed for kids, from age 4 to 7 early on. But by 3rd to 5th grade, you are having units, on Native Americans, right, in the curriculum. And so it's like, what are in those units? majority of those works that are shared, again, are life pre 1900 realities. And most of those, if not almost all of them, are written by non natives. So, how do we give this, student population and older, really, an entry point to say,
Mhm.
okay, here's actually, what has gone on in this country. Um, but, one of my struggles, like you say, was with the language because certain verbs don't mean the same thing, right? We will change the legal meaning of things. And so having vocabulary that's accessible to those kids at the third grade and up level, also making sure that the concepts are relatable. And so that took a lot of massaging and nuance, within the main text. But I think the way that we helped those who are eager to dive into and look at lessons that may be a little older than that is also with the timeline in the back and giving people more information about specific laws that happen in each of those sections. Each double page spread really is focused on introducing the concept. So, like with tribal activism, it reads Native citizens continue to speak up, organize, and increase our longstanding commitment to strengthen tribal sovereignty. Speak out about termination and relocation. Recover our lands and harvest traditional foods. Draw attention to Native peoples' lack of sufficient health care. Help students go to college, including on tribal lands. With our collective voice and presence, Native nations say, we are still here. So that is easily understandable. But in the timeline, you have specifically when the Termination Act was passed, and what that meant. The 109 Native nations found their status, their relationship with the federal government terminated. And so
Mhm.
people were literally homeless, like not able to stay on their land. But that would bog up the text. So you introduce the concept and give them an overview, and then in the back matter, we've still, used accessible language, but it is more specific about just what really has gone on. And again, it's nothing that's gonna show up in popular culture, to a large extent, and certainly not curriculum.
Yeah. So I think one of the things from the beginning of this book that we knew that we wanted Frane and you to work together again on this. And
Mhm.
one of the things was really that we had to figure out, how do we present this information in a book that still has some kind of a story arc in it? Because as an editor, that's one of my things, right? I really love books where even when it's a book, a survey of different information, like here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing, I still really love it when there's some kind of an arc that sort of holds it all together.
Mhm.
And I remember you and Frane and I 2 years ago at ALA, right, in DC. Was it? No, it was annual, at ALA annual in June in DC. And we sat down and had dinner. And we really were like, how can we do this? How can we make this work? So do you want to tell folks a little about what that structure is and how, and because I think it's lovely the way that we landed on that.
Well, as always, Pranay is an incredible artist. And so she's always thinking about young readers and how they're visually going to take in the information, as any good illustrator does. But she's an author illustrator, so she's also, written her own books. And so we thought about, how do we not just have like a photo or numerous small photos on the page that would depict, say for the passage I just read you, is there like small spot art for termination, a small spot art for relocation? Like this could get dizzying trying to take in all that information. And so she was like, I think one picture, per spread helps to let the reader access the information that's coming in, which I loved. And then we looked at, well, again, you're not going to get this information in, 90 some percent of the schools, but there are schools that do teach this information. And that is Some tribal schools do, certainly, but there are a number of Native community schools in urban areas that cover this information. So, like the Sovereignty School in Oklahoma City, the Native American Community Academy in Albuquerque. There's another Native school up in Minneapolis. So they're in various places around the country. And she's like, what if we set it in a school like that and had the students giving presentations for each of those units? And so I love this. I'm going to share the opening spread here. So you've got all the families coming for Indigenous Peoples Day. There's a presentation that evening that the students are giving, but we set it up in the opening spread. So this is where I say, like, it's less stanza like. And I have a broader, kind of more opening page, but if you look here on the board, it says Indigenous Peoples Day Project. And so there's all the different topics, the 12 topics that we have, and students that are assigned to them. And so they're all working on those. And then as you go through each page, including on the tribal activism page, you will see the student's name is above the like Jesse's presentation, because Jesse was assigned or signed up for that. And I won't share the end reveal, but that was a way for us to make it accessible, and also for students to see themselves actually doing this work, taking the book and diving into one of those topics, something that's brought up on a page, something in the timeline, that this is not anything that they themselves can't do. They have peers that are doing this in other schools already. Mm-hmm. And I'll let you in on a little juicy tidbit. We are working on the audiobook. We're going to be putting that together and hopefully having that out right around the time this book comes out on April 20th. And so one of the things that we're looking at is hoping to have students who are reading each one of these.
That would be so fantastic. So yeah, I think there's so many advantages, I think, to the that construct that's in the book, because I think somebody points out that, librarians really love the idea of reinforcing that, as you say, that kids can do their own research, right? And I also love that because each presentation in the book, each spread is a presentation given by a Native American kid, that all the writing is in first person, right? It's we are still here. It's our nations. It's our lands. And I think that is really wonderful as a way of really clear ownership around, this is our history and we are now presenting it to you in a book, right? So you've actually given voice almost to these 12 kids, right? Who don't exist, but do exist in the world somewhere, who do know that history. And I also think that it does encourage kids who are reading the book to go do more research themselves, right? And this is where one of the things I'm missing so much about being at conferences this year is standing in the booth and teachers and librarians come by, and I always say, oh, what age do you work with? And they're like, oh, high school, you have nothing for. And I'm like, oh no, come here. These are the 3 or 4 picture books that I want you to use with your high schoolers. And this is the one that I would be hand selling to every middle and secondary school librarian and teacher this year, right? And because I think that this book is so ripe for a jumping off point for a history unit about Native Americans in middle and high school classrooms. Do you want to talk a little bit about that at all?
Definitely. Again, certainly your middle school and high school students are capable of more in-depth research. And as long as they stay off of Wikipedia, they'll be fine. But they can dive in on any of these topics and any of the subtopics. There's a wonderful spread that Frenae has in here. I mean, there's all of these are wonderful spreads. Let me say, but this one I love, just the happiness that is all these Native families. And so she's talking about the Indian Child Welfare and Education Act, which happens in the 70s. And it's why was the Indian Child Welfare Act necessary to be passed? What's behind that? And that's stuff that students can look into. And why is it still so important today? Like, why is that still relevant in 2021, 2022 and beyond? Students can look that up and read the history of it. They can read congressional testimony. They can look at what people have said, what tribes are saying themselves, the work that they're doing around that act, which is basically trying to ensure that Native children who go into the foster care system are kept with Native families. That is critical, and that was not the case when the act was passed in the 70s, and in some jurisdictions today, it's still a challenge.
Mhm.
So, similarly with education, why for so long was the focus on assimilation and not having students be able to have access to speaking their native language and English, right? We have English language learners programs, yes, but why is English being prized over the original languages that were present on this continent and people still speak? So there's numerous ways that they can, like I say, have a jumping off point for a topic on a spread. One of the things that is mentioned in the timeline, whether that's a specific act or maybe it's natives in serving in the military, within a certain, war, or maybe looking at natives in the Coast Guard, how many have served, who had, what types of duties have they had, et cetera. There's all kinds of opportunities for more rich exploration that leads them to, again, seeing the whole refrain of the book, which is we are still here. We're still contributing. We're still vibrant agents, and recognizing that, these are their peer group. They are the parents, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, within their community and beyond. Um, and I don't think that enters into our consciousness enough. So sometimes it takes doing those projects. And I've talked to, many non-native people who are like, oh, when I had contact with this person, or I was able to go to this community. For a lot of young people, that may not be a reality. And so families, teachers, and librarians, are able to use books to help students make those connections, in a way that just may not be possible given where they currently live and what they're currently doing in real life.
Right. So we have a question that has come in, and the question is: when you write a book about a specific culture, what kind of things do you have to consider to make sure that it can connect with a wider audience or people outside that culture? And you and I talk about this a lot, right? Because it's like, who are we writing this for? And how much are we willing to shift things, right?
Right.
So do you want to answer that one? Because it's a really good question, I think.
Yeah. I think that, first of all, it is a wonderful question. And Wado, thank you for bringing that up. Really writing for, children, regardless of the background being presented, to me is not a lot of difference, in that specificity always wins out. The more specific that you can be, and the more that you are grounded in what you are writing, that is more universal. So there are people that I have heard from all over the world about We Are Grateful, OTSALIHELIGA. They are not Cherokee. They've never met anyone that's Cherokee, right? But it had that connection to them because it is very specific about Cherokee people. I centered Cherokee children and families and community as I wrote that book. And I thought about, who we are, how we're raised, what values we're, what we are taught about gratitude, that it is not during November. It is not at Thanksgiving, right? It is all year long, every season, every day. And so even similarly with this book, as Karen said, I'm writing from the viewpoint of Native children, right? Who are presenting this work, but also really, and more broadly, because we hadn't done the art first, Native nations in general. We are still here. Here are the things that have happened to us. Here are the things that we have advocated for. And it's that specificity and that knowing. And again, recognizing that more than yourself has to be involved in the creation of the story, whether that's the text, whether that's the art, the design, whatever. It is essential that you are in a humble place to take that in, because there's a lot of feedback that you're going to receive from all of those various people. And the more specific that you can be, really the more universal the work is. And people can not only, see that, but then connect to it themselves, and what in their lived experience um, connects them to what they're reading. And similarly, what do then they see? Oh, I need to learn more about this.
Mhm.
I really have a knowledge gap here.
Yeah.
But if you try to write in what I consider, you know, generic indigenous or, type of things, it doesn't reflect reality. We come from individual nations, um, even as we have, in this case, federal laws and policies that are impacting us. Those tribal realities are very different in terms of how things impact, people at that local level.
I think the other thing for me is that oftentimes when you read something or you consume something on television or a movie, that depending on who you are as the viewer, you're going to get whatever you're going to get from it, that depending partially on your own background, right? So if a native
Mhm.
kid were to read this book, they may pull a bunch of stuff out of it that a white kid might not, right? Or a Latinx kid might not. But I feel like the goal can't be universal understanding to the detriment of the group who belongs to the group that's being written about getting that extra stuff, right? So, and I always bring everything back to pop culture, but I'm a little obsessed at the moment with the show called Kim's Convenience on Netflix, which is a Canadian made show, and it's about a Korean family. And there's so much in that show that resonates with me in terms of family life and parents and kids and all of that. But there's a ton I'm missing, right? There are references in that show that I don't get because I don't know enough about Korean culture. But that's okay, right? Because I don't need to get every single thing out of something in order to find myself in it. And so I think it's really important what you say about who can access it and why, and that doesn't matter as much as the fact that everybody can, right?
Yeah. I mean, with We Are Grateful OTSALIHELIGA, if you're a Cherokee person and you're looking at that art and you're reading those things, I mean, you are going to understand so much more than so many other people, right? That because that book is for you, that you are centered in that book. But I also, wanted for those kids, so Cherokee kids that are living, outside of their communities or not as connected to the culture. I wanted it to be a way for them to go, oh, I want to learn about this. I mean, I haven't done that before. As much as it was, for anyone knowing, yes, other people would be reading it. Similarly, with We Are Still Here, for Native children like myself growing up who like know about their tribe, but they, and they know there are other tribes, but they don't yet really understand that there's this larger governmental system in place through the feds that
Mhm.
is impacting their lives in a major way. It's like I wanted them to have that introduction. And how better to do that than to provide an accessible way for them to learn that, does it benefit everyone else to learn that too? Yes. But foremost, I'm thinking of that child myself, my son. It's like, how do I share this knowledge that I have that I didn't, have an appreciation or a real in-depth knowledge of until I was in college?
Mhm.
I mean, that's too late, right? We need
Mhm.
to have an awareness that this is these governments existed, and then later there was a federal government added. Later there were states, but first, Native nations had governments. That's at the basis of this, and then these other things come, and they are impacting, the governments of Native nations. But a lot of kids don't understand that because again, what is taught in schools? It's
Right.
not that our governments were the first and are still here, and all of this other stuff happens, much later.
Right. Right. So we talk a lot in publishing and in Kidlit, I think, about Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's idea of windows and mirrors and sliding glass doors.
Right.
And we often leave the sliding glass doors part off, right? And we talk about windows and mirrors a lot. But one of the things that some folks have sort of indicated recently is that it's really more of a prism, right? That it's not necessarily that I'm just looking through a window or I'm looking in a mirror. It's more of how is that all reflected around me, like a prism would do, right? And where are those different sparks of light hitting and how and on whom, right? And I think that's part of what you're talking about too a little bit, is that for you, the most important part of your books is the mirror part, right? That a Native kid can look and see themselves. And I think one of the things, the secondary reason you really wanted to write books like this is so that other people who don't know anything about this, who are looking through the window, right, get all of that. But a lot of what you've just said is more kind of prismy, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I had not heard that until actually we were at Kindling Words and Uma Krishnaswamy, presented that concept, and I was like, yes. I love the prism. It really is giving people, a way to connect to their own experience as well as appreciate those other facets of that analogy that she's that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishops has created.
Yeah. So we have another specific question, which is that so the person's asking, like, you were paired up with Franny and you knew she would illustrate, and so did that change how you wrote the book? But I think actually what you did is you wrote the text sort of on spec with like a really detailed idea of what it would look like before we went and said, hey, do you want to illustrate this and partner with Traci again? But then in the end, once we sort of all brainstormed together to figure out what that arc would look like, did it influence how the final text got created or not? What do you think?
No, again, the final text, like, honest to God, the challenge was just making it accessible and not so much with legalese and terms that, again, you have to be so careful with like verb choice and things because not all synonyms are equal. So I don't want to represent something in the text that, my folks who practice federal law and policy are like, that's not what that means, what she's saying here, because there are other books that are, these kind of survey books that have presented wrong information. And so, I'm trying to boil this down to the easiest part. And that's why I say I love the fact that she chose to have one picture, to help, again, just make that text shine and be as accessible as possible. But no.
And one of the things I love that we decided. Sorry.
I was just going to say that I wrote the text, in my own thing. And then she just has illuminated it in a way that I did not anticipate. It's fantastic.
And one of the things I love is that we ended up putting in the back matter a little description of each illustration and where it's intended to be taking place and what tribe it's depicting. And I think that that's just such an enhancement for the text overall. Because we got really specific about that. Like Franny said, this is who I'm depicting here. And then you said, okay, great. Then if that's the case, let me check with that tribe. Let's make a few tweaks to make sure it's exactly right. And then let's write a little blurb about that. And I think it's an added layer of information. I want to make sure that during this discussion, because I think librarians are such an important group of people to think about and know about what we talk about editing and working with creators, and that publishing at the moment has some things to answer for in terms of who works in children's publishing and how diverse or not it is. And I want you to talk a little bit about your experience working with a non-Native editor who came into this not knowing very much about Native history. And I just want to give some space for that, because I think it's important to make it clear that I am a white person who didn't know this information and never was taught it either.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a real challenge that we face in the industry, because obviously, people who are white who are submitting manuscripts or art. The majority of people, not the majority, whatever it is, it's over 2/3 of the people that are in the industry, like, share that same background. And so there's a level of just presenting your information, and it's going to be, understood for the most part. There will be less back and forth. And so certainly for, Native creatives, there's a level of education that has to happen, because you'll get these comments in the text or on the art about, like, well, what is this? Or I don't understand that. Or just, I don't think this is correct. And you're like, what are you talking about? Because again, no one has had this exposure, right? We're not, because we have not been included, even though we're still here, a lot of just general ignorance is, I won't say willful, it's general ignorance that has come about just from participating in the educational system and being part of this nation. So I have always appreciated that, when you put things in the column, and I'm like, Karen, what is this? Like, you've always been very open, and the same thing in the art, because I will, of course, mark up everything. And as I say, other people see this stuff. So, I share it with others, and I get their feedback. And that really, to me, is what made this book happen, because of that process that we had with We Are Grateful, OTSALIHELIGA. Like, Frenae was the exact same way. She flew on her own dime from West Australia to the Cherokee Nation. She sat down with numerous people. She pulled out her sketches. They could say whatever they wanted. Like, she made those changes. There wasn't like, but I think aesthetically it needs to be this way. There was none of that. Like, she was very humble. Like, she was absolutely the way she should have been, like, you're depicting this and you want to get it right. And so, and I knew from seeing her previous work, like, how well she does the research. Mm-hmm. And so with this book, again, because it is so close to my heart, right? And this is the work that I did previously and what I've studied, I knew that we would be okay, in terms of presenting the information, Frenae doing what was necessary. We both were researching photos that she could use as kind of templates for what she, wanted to present on the page, and talking with people. And so again, that openness to, okay, this was my idea, but that's not going to work, or this isn't great. Fine, scrap it. We do something else. Mm-hmm. That's what I hope happens across the industry, mm-hmm. for people. And like I say, so that at some point you don't have to have it in your contract that says, like, I will review all art and all these kind of things, that people just know, like, this is how we do stuff. And that whole, like, separation of artist and illustrator thing. Even if you're from different tribes, whatever it is, or the person's not Native at all, like, it needs to be collaborative. Like, that drives me nuts. When people say, oh, well, you don't really see anything till the sketches. Like, why? Here's all of my information, right? Like, here's all the pictures. Here's the stuff I've done. Please ask me questions. Like, don't spend time sketching and doing things. Let me connect you with people who can help you with stuff. That's a lot of work. An illustrator puts an incredible amount of work into these things. And so I think that the fact that we had the relationship that we did based on We Are Grateful, OTSALIHELIGA, let me just really pour my heart into this book, and and add, and feature what we have, and make this, like I say, that entry point, knowing that everyone was committed to doing the right thing by the text and the art and how it was represented. So I'm super excited for it to be out in the world and to share it with everyone.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing you hit on. That's part of my philosophy, is that I really need to be aware. I think the biggest question that editors should ask themselves is to try to know what you don't know, right? And that can be really hard, because to see one's own blind spots is difficult. And I think we often jump into a text and approach it and say, I'm looking at this as grammar, or as flow, or as story arc, and it's irrelevant what the topic is. I can edit that. And it's like, well, but maybe not, because sometimes even the structure or even the way that the sentences are written is informed by culture in a way that we, I think, have to revere at first of all, and second of all, really appreciate what it can bring to the market. And I think that the one of the things that is lost when an editor doesn't stop for a minute to take the time to say, okay, I have a question here, but I don't know if the question is coming from my own ignorance, as you say, or if my question is coming from someplace else, right? And so a lot of times in those comments that you mentioned when you and I go back and forth, a lot of times it says, here's the question I have. I have no idea what I'm talking about. And this might be a place where you're going to tell me this is why this is, right? But it's also useful, I think, in some ways to take my ignorance and use it, right, as a filter. Like, okay, so if Karen isn't understanding this because she doesn't have the background, is there a way that I could tweak it slightly to broaden out the audience who will now get it, right? And so there is a little benefit there depending on sort of the attitude of the person you're working with, which I try and hope that my attitude is always, you're in charge of this, but let me ask you the things that are coming up for me as a way to help us make it stronger, right?
Yeah. And what I appreciate about you is that there are times where I'm like, no, it just needs to stay that way, and you're like, okay, because I'm like, if we change it, then, we have lost what I'm going for here, and like you say, the cultural aspect that, again, who I'm centering, is going to be missing for them, because I never want to write something that is just for that broader group with the folks who are at the center of this going, what is this? Like, oh, she's written for, this is like for everybody else. And, we're like outside of this, because that's what I read growing up. Like, no, thank you. I don't need to spend any more time putting that in the world. But, this is something that Cynthia Leidig-Smith and I have talked about a lot, and we put an article together in the school library journal last fall, because I think it is hard to evaluate Native storytelling, a lot of times Native art, just because you haven't had a lot of exposure to it, So I would say, as librarians, when you're looking to, curate collections, I mean, look at what the American Indian Library Association is recognizing, right? Those folks are librarians from a Native background or serving in Native communities. They are working with folks who are, in that community, or like I said, they're from that community, because they have a different set of criteria that they're looking for, as they evaluate books. There are, just so many more people coming into the industry now. And I see a lot of, certainly bigger presses publishing books, but also a lot of smaller presses and more tribal presses and things. And so I feel like we're getting just more variety of how storytelling is happening, and book structures and art. And it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I think that comes up a lot is, who is something for and why, and this idea of writing for a broader group, but that maybe sometimes things really are for certain people, and that that's okay. But at the same time, what we don't want is librarians to say, well, that's not for you, it's for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And we know that happens sometimes, books with, let's say, novels with Black protagonists, and they say to white kids, well, no, that's about a Black kid, it's not for you. And we really hope that that's getting more and more, that's stopping more and more.
Yes.
Right. But that it's okay as well to write specifically. Like, I think there's been a few times where you and I have talked back and forth in comments where I've said, I'm not really interested in pandering to white people here. Like, let's leave it so that, somebody might have to go look something up. Let that be the case. Right. And I'm thinking of, I just lost my third piece there that was in that. But that sometimes things, I know that when we made the decision to not italicize the Cherokee words in We Are Grateful, OTSALIHELIGA, right? Because in theory, the English style guide says if there's a foreign word in a book that it needs to be italicized. And my thing is, okay, well, it's foreign to English. English is the main language the book is written in, but the book is about Cherokee people. It's for Cherokee readers. So why are we setting apart the word that belongs to the language of the group that the book is about? No, like, we're not going to italicize that, right? That those words are for all the readers, but they're really for those readers who are Cherokee, as you said before, right? So I think there are small ways that we can really home in on, yes, books are for everyone, but also there's something special here at the center of this book that's for a specific group of people. There is a question in the chat that there's a group of second graders who have a question, which I love.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, the second graders want to know what they should do as they get ready to be writers and illustrators who want to share their own work.
Well, I hope that you are writing and that you are drawing pictures and working together to create your own stories. Maybe you're drawing and writing, making your own art now. Maybe you're working together, but that is absolutely the best way to practice. I have to do a lot of writing. And what I tell kids when I go and I meet with them in person at school visits is what you see in the published book is never the first draft. It's not even usually like the third draft. It's multiple drafts. And that's the same for the illustrators. So I, haven't practiced any visual art, but Frenae will have what she calls her sloppy copies. And those are just pencil sketches. And then she erases and she goes back and draws and she changes. Because again, remember, I'm giving her comments and other people are giving her comments about the art. And so then she'll go and she'll draw those out again. And then she paints and then we give her comments. And so she has to paint over stuff. That's happening at the same time with my story with the text. So I will get comments from, my son, who's in 5th grade. He gives me comments all the time about my work. He's pretty harsh. And then I have other people that will read it. I send it off to Karen. Karen reads it and gives me comments. Then Karen passes it around at her office. Other people give her comments to share with me. And so I do a lot of revision. So if you are working on writing or drawing, that is fantastic. Like, that's the practice that you need to share your own stories. And you can be sharing your stories right now, but certainly sharing them with other people and getting feedback. And again, when you give feedback, always start with what is working for you in the story or in the art. And then say, in this part, maybe this wasn't as clear, or in this illustration, I wasn't sure how this was related to what I saw in the text, something like that. But you can just ask them a question like, well, what did you mean by this section? If you're unsure, because a lot of times when we're writing, we know, or when we're drawing, we know what we're trying to do in our head, but that may not be clear on the page. So you definitely want to, ask those kinds of questions and to be supportive of each other, right? Because that is how we all get better, is having people who look at our work, who give us feedback, and we take that in. And sometimes it can be hard for someone to say, this page, like I felt lost, like you took me off track in the story. And then I might have to cut that whole page out of the story. Okay, I want you to stay with the story, right? That's the important part. So definitely keep, writing and drawing and just working on that, because that's how you do it. That's how you do it.
I think the other thing for kids too is to remember that oftentimes people will say to you, oh, you want to be an author or an illustrator when you grow up? And you can say, actually, I'm an author right now. I'm an illustrator right now because I write every day, or I write every week, or I draw every week. And that already makes you an author illustrator, even if you're not published officially yet. So remember that too, that you can claim that as part of your identity. And right now, you don't have to wait.
That's right. And it is wonderful at your age in 2nd grade because you have all this creativity, right, that you're just willing to share. And I just want to say, hang on to that and just keep using it. Because when at my age now, I have to think back to when I was in 2nd grade and what was I thinking about and what was I doing and how would I have thought about the world? So I often have to go back. You all know you all know what's funny, you know what's driving you crazy, you know what's upset you because you just experienced it, right? So write those things down. Those are the best things. And when you grow up and you're my age and you're still writing and illustrating, you can pull out those old sketches, you can pull out the things you've written, and then they make wonderful stories and dialogue. You can like integrate them into your stories. You've already done the work. I wish I had done that at your age. It would make things so much easier sometimes.
There you go, for sure, right?
Thank you all for your question and for joining us today.
Yeah, so we have about 5 more minutes only. So I want to be sure that anyone who's watching has a question, go ahead and throw that in the comments so that we can get to the question. But I want to be sure that we didn't miss anything that we really want. Well, let's say that the pub date for the book, it comes out on April 20th.
It does.
So that's exciting.
You can pre-order it now. So you can go to Charles Bridge's website and pre-order it, charlesbridge.com. You can get it online from any retailer. So, if you want to support indie bookstores, that's great. One next to you, bookshop.org. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, wherever. But, we always want to support our indie bookstores, or like I say, buy it directly from the publisher. April 20th, we are working on an audiobook too. So I'm super excited about that. And just know that you can always reach out to me on social media, and ask questions for those of you in classes, about the book, and or via my website, send me letters, whatever, tracisorell.com. But we are super, super excited to have this book out in your classrooms, in your libraries, in your hands in April.
Yeah, for sure. And we hope that people really enjoy, like we said, the beautiful artwork as well as the really fantastic information.
Yes.
And there is a little in the book. If you look hard, you can find Traci and Frane in the book. So you have to kind of see if you can find that. There is a picture of them on the back flap of this book, of the jacket. So that gives you a hint about what they might look like when you're trying to find them inside the book.
So here we are.
There they are. There they are.
That was at the ALA conference that Karen is talking about when we sat and came up with the idea around the art.
Yeah.
So, but see if you can find us in the book. So.
Yeah, and what else? I think we covered everything we wanted to cover.
We get all the questions in the chat.
Yes, we got all the questions in the chat. Someone is very excited about that little secret that you and Frane are in the book, so that's cool.
Yeah. I was very surprised when I saw the art. I was like, wait, who's that?
And she's like, that's you and me. Yeah, very, very sweet. Yes.
I did not know that is a thing. So for those of you, you second graders and others who are interested in drawing and who are drawing right now, you can put in books what's called an Easter egg. And so some things, you may put in there that people looking at the book don't know about. And so that's one of those things that's put in there. And my son saw that and he was like, I think I know who that is.
Yes, it's very fun. All right. So do you have anything left that we want to make sure? I think that there's a few notes in the comments for folks from Charles Bridge saying, don't forget to check out, there's a sneak peek of this book on www.charlesbridge.com. So you can get it there. And, definitely join in on other Charles Bridge stuff that's happening during midwinter for sure. And I think our booth is up and all that stuff too. And I'll just give a brief pause here so that the person in the background can tell me if there's anything else I should tell folks who are watching. But no, I guess we're done. She's going to kick us right out of this stream. So thank you so much, Traci. This was so fun.
Yes. Wado, thank you, Karen, and to everyone who joined us. We appreciate your time and your questions. We look forward to sharing. We are still here with you on April 20th.
Awesome. Bye.